The blood-red sunset painted the horizon as Rachel Galloway watched the last of the townsfolk exit the church, their whispers following her like a cold wind. It was the third Sunday since her return to Steins Pass, New Mexico territory, and the third Sunday she'd endured their judgment. The year was 1885, and while the West was supposedly wild and free, the small mining community nestled near the Arizona border had brought its moral codes and judgments with it from the East. Rachel tugged at her worn leather gloves, pulling them tighter as if they could shield her from the townspeople's stares. At 26, she was neither young bride nor aging spinster, but something far worse in their eyes, a widow who had dared to love again and lost twice. "Did you hear she's back at her father's old place?" Mrs. Thornton's voice carried across the churchyard. "After 2 husbands in the ground, some might call that a curse. Or worse," replied Mrs. Henderson with a knowing glance. "Some say she drove Thomas to drink and John to that mining accident." Rachel kept her chin high as she walked past them, though each word stung like a slap. Her first husband, Thomas, had indeed turned to whiskey after their child was stillborn 3 years ago, eventually riding his horse off a cliff in a drunken stupor. Her second husband, John, had died just 8 months after their wedding when a tunnel collapsed in the Silver Creek mine. 2 loves, 2 losses, and a town that had decided she was to blame for both. Miss Rachel. The deep voice startled her, and she turned to find Zachariah Finch leaning against the hitching post, his worn Stetson tipped low over his eyes. At 32, Zach was the foreman of the Broken Spur Ranch just outside of town. He'd arrived in Steins Pass 2 months ago, after Rachel had already gone to live with her sister in Santa Fe, but stories about him had reached even there. "Mr. Finch," she acknowledged with a slight nod, clutching her Bible tighter to her chest. "Seems to me those ladies could use a reminder about Christian charity," he said, nodding toward the gossips who had now turned their attention to them. "I'm quite used to it," Rachel replied, her voice steady despite the pain their words caused. "People need someone to blame when tragedy strikes." "I'm simply convenient." Zach pushed himself away from the post, his tall frame unfolding to its full height. The late afternoon sun caught in his dark hair, highlighting strands of copper among the brown. "May I walk you home? It seems your reputation can hardly suffer more from my company." A small smile tugged at Rachel's lips despite herself. "Are you suggesting your reputation is as tarnished as mine, Mr. Finch? Let's just say I understand what it's like to have people make up their minds about you without knowing the whole story." His eyes, a striking blue that reminded her of summer skies, met hers without flinching. Rachel hesitated, aware of the watching eyes. Then she nodded. "I would appreciate the company, though I warn you association with me has proven dangerous for men in this town." As they walked away from the church, Rachel could feel the stairs boring into her back. Her father's homestead was on the edge of town, a modest house with a small barn and corral that she'd returned to after John's death. The walk would take 15 minutes, 15 minutes of speculation for the good people of Steins Pass to enjoy. "I heard you've reopened your father's tack shop," Zach said as they walked down the dusty main street. Rachel nodded. "It's what I know. Father taught me leatherwork before he passed, and I've always had a knack for it." Her fingers, hidden in the worn leather gloves, flexed involuntarily. "It's honest work, and I need the income. The men at the ranch speak highly of your craftsmanship. Said your father made the best saddles in the territory, and you've got his touch." She looked up at him, surprised. "They said that. Folks talk about more than just scandal, Mrs. Galloway." His lips quirked into a half-smile. "Though I admit, scandal makes for livelier conversation over beans and coffee." As they reached the edge of town, The houses grew farther apart, and the gossip-laden air seemed to lighten. Rachel found herself relaxing slightly in Zach's company. "How are you finding Steins Pass, Mr. Finch?" "It must be quite different from wherever you came from." "I've been in worse places," he replied. "Worked ranches all over Colorado, Wyoming, Texas. The land here has its own kind of beauty, harsh but honest." He glanced at the distant mountains, their peaks turning purple in the fading light. "And the people are? Well, people are the same most everywhere, quick to judge, slow to forgive." There was something in his tone that made Rachel curious. "You speak from experience." "Don't we all?" He adjusted his hat, shielding his eyes from the setting sun. "But that's a story for another time." They walked in comfortable silence until they reached Rachel's gate. The small house stood alone against the darkening sky, smoke still rising from the chimney where she'd left a fire burning that morning. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Finch." He nodded but made no move to leave. Instead, his eyes moved to her hands. "Those gloves have seen better days." Rachel instinctively tucked her hands behind her skirt. "They were my father's. I've mended them more times than I can count, but they're familiar," he finished for her. "Sometimes we hold onto things not because they're still useful, but because they remind us of who we were." The unexpected insight surprised her. "Yes," she said softly. "Exactly that. I should be going." He tipped his hat. "But I'll be needing a new pair of riding gloves soon. Perhaps I'll stop by your shop this week." "I'd be happy to help you, Mr. Finch." As he turned to leave, Rachel impulsively called after him. "Why did you walk me home today? You must know what they'll say about you now." Zach paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Miss Rachel, I learned long ago not to let other people's opinions dictate my actions." He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. "Besides, any man who judges you without knowing you isn't worth knowing himself." With that, he walked away, his tall figure silhouetted against the sunset. Rachel watched him go, a strange flutter in her chest that she hadn't felt in a very long time. A flutter she'd sworn never to feel again, because loving twice had cost her everything. And she couldn't afford to love a third time. The following morning, Rachel rose before dawn to prepare for the day ahead. Her small tack shop occupied what had once been her father's workshop, attached to the house by a covered walkway. Inside, the familiar smells of leather, oil, and polish greeted her like old friends. She lit the lanterns, casting a warm glow over the workbench where several projects awaited her attention. A bridle that needed new reins, a saddle with a torn fender, and a pair of chaps she was crafting for one of the cowboys from the Diamond T Ranch. Her hands, now free from the confining gloves, moved deftly among her tools' awls, needles, cutting knives, and punches all arranged in precise order. Work had always been her salvation. When Thomas died, she'd thrown herself into leatherwork, completing orders her father had left unfinished after his passing. When John died, she'd fled to her sister's home, but even there she'd found a local saddler willing to let her help in his shop. Her hands needed to be busy. It was the only way to quiet her mind. The bell above the door jingled shortly after 8 o'clock. Rachel looked up, expecting to see Elijah Peterson, who'd mentioned needing a new cinch for his pack mule. Instead, Sheriff Wade Daniels stood in the doorway, his thumbs hooked in his belt, his expression unreadable beneath his mustache. "Morning, Rachel," he said, removing his hat. At 40, the sheriff had a weathered face and gray-streaked dark hair. He'd been kind to her after both her husbands' deaths, one of the few people in town who hadn't openly judged her. "Sheriff," she acknowledged with a nod. "What can I do for you today? Just checking in. Saw you walking with Finch yesterday after church." He stepped further into the shop, examining a saddle displayed on a wooden stand. "Thought I should mention. Folks are talking." Rachel set down her stitching awl with deliberate care. "Folks are always talking, Sheriff. It's what they do best in Steins Pass. This is different." His voice lowered. "Finch isn't. Well, let's just say there are rumors about his past." "There are rumors about my past too," she replied evenly. "Most of them untrue," the sheriff sighed. "Rachel, I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. Your father was a good man, and you're a good woman who's had more than her share of bad luck. I'd hate to see you invite more trouble by walking home from church with a man who showed me a basic kindness." Her voice had an edge to it now. "What exactly are these rumors about Mr. Finch?" Sheriff Daniels ran a hand over his mustache. "Nothing concrete. Just whispers that he left Wyoming in a hurry, that there might have been a man killed. And that name Finch, some say it's not his real name." Rachel picked up her awl again, jabbing it perhaps too forcefully through the leather she was working. "Whispers and rumors, the currency of small towns. Just be careful," he said, placing his hat back on his head. "That's all I'm saying." After he left, Rachel tried to focus on her work, but found her thoughts drifting to Zachariah Finch. Was he running from something? She'd seen nothing in his manner that suggested violence or deceit. But then, she'd been wrong about men before. Thomas had seemed so steady, so dependable when they'd married. No one could have predicted how the loss of their child would break him, how the grief would turn him toward the bottle instead of toward her. And John, quiet, serious John, had courted her with poetry and promises of a new beginning, only to leave her a widow twice over before their first anniversary. The door opened again, the bell's cheerful jingle at odds with her somber thoughts. This time, it was Mrs. Henderson from the church, accompanied by her daughter, Abigail. "We need a new halter for Abigail's pony," Mrs. Henderson announced, barely meeting Rachel's eyes. "Mr. Henderson said to come to you, though I told him Frederickson's general store carries tack now." "I'm happy to help," Rachel replied, deliberately cordial. "What kind of halter were you thinking of? I have several ready-made, or I could craft something special." While Abigail excitedly examined the different styles of halters, Mrs. Henderson leaned across the counter, lowering her voice. "I saw you with that cowboy yesterday. Aren't you afraid?" "Afraid of what, Mrs. Henderson?" "Of what people will say, after 2 husbands." She glanced at her daughter to ensure she wasn't listening. "Some are saying you're cursed, that any man who loves you is doomed." Rachel's fingers tightened around the piece of leather she was holding. "And do you believe that, Mrs. Henderson?" The older woman had the grace to look uncomfortable. "It's not for me to say, but it does seem unusual." "What's unusual is how quickly people forget that I lost my husband and my child," Rachel said quietly, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her. "How they forget that I mourned Thomas for a full year before John even spoke to me. How they forget that mining accidents happen every day in this territory." Mrs. Henderson drew back, her lips pursed. "Well, I never meant to upset you. We'll take the braided halter, please." After they left, Rachel closed the shop early, retreating to her house, where she could let her composure slip without witnesses. She sank into her father's old rocking chair, and finally allowed the tears to come, tears of frustration, of loneliness, of the cumulative weight of carrying other people's judgments. Her father had always told her that the opinions of others mattered less than the truth in her own heart. But living by that philosophy was harder than he'd made it sound, especially in a place like Steins Pass, where a person standing could mean the difference between having customers or watching your business wither away. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Hastily wiping her eyes, Rachel smoothed her apron and went to answer it, On her porch stood Zachariah Finch, hat in hand, looking somewhat uncomfortable. "Mr. Finch," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "Miss Rachel." He shifted his weight. "I apologize for calling at your home rather than your shop. I saw you close up early and—" He paused, taking in her reddened eyes. "I've come at a bad time." "No, she stopped, unsure why she was about to lie. "Yes, it's not the best time, but I welcome the distraction." "Would you like some coffee?" He hesitated, then nodded. "That would be kind, thank you." Rachel led him into her small parlor, gesturing for him to take a seat while she busied herself at the stove, grateful for the chance to compose herself. When she returned with 2 cups of steaming coffee, she found him examining a photograph on the mantel. "Your family?" he asked. "Yes, my parents, my sister Mary and me." She handed him a cup. "That was taken just before my father passed. My mother died when I was young." Zach studied the photograph. "You have his eyes, kind eyes." Rachel sat across from him, cupping her hands around her mug. "You said you needed new riding gloves." He set the photograph down carefully. "Actually, that was just an excuse. I came because—" He paused, seemingly searching for the right words. "Because I heard what the sheriff was saying about me, and I thought you deserved to hear the truth from me directly." Rachel's breath caught. "I see." "There was an incident in Wyoming," he said, his blue eyes meeting hers steadily. "A man was killed. I didn't kill him, but I was there, and some believe I was responsible." "What happened?" Zach set his coffee down untouched. "I was working as a trail boss for a cattle drive. We had a cook, Emmett Hayes, mean-spirited man with a habit of picking fights. One night he got into it with one of the young hands, a boy of about 19. Things escalated. Emmett pulled a knife." He paused, the memory clearly painful. "I stepped in, we struggled, and Emmett fell, his knife." He made a gesture toward his chest. "He landed on his own blade." Rachel watched his face, looking for signs of deception, but seeing only a raw honesty that made her heart ache. "And people blamed you." The ranch owner's son was sweet on Emmett's sister. "He spread word that I'd murdered Emmett in cold blood." Zach's jaw tightened. "By the time the sheriff investigated, half the county believed I was a killer. The sheriff knew the truth but suggested it might be best if I moved on, so I did." "And your name," the sheriff mentioned. A wry smile crossed his face. "Finch is my mother's maiden name. My full name is Zachariah Finch Foster. I started using Finch after Wyoming, thinking a small change might help distance me from the rumors." He shrugged. "Turns out rumors have a way of following you regardless." "Yes," Rachel said softly, "they certainly do." They sat in silence for a moment, the ticking of the mantel clock the only sound. Finally, Rachel spoke again. "Thank you for telling me this. You didn't have to. I believe in being honest, Miss Rachel, especially with people He hesitated. "People I respect." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Then Rachel remembered herself and stood up. "I should get back to work. I have orders to complete." Zach rose as well, reaching for his hat. "Of course. I've taken up enough of your time." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I meant what I said yesterday. People's opinions shouldn't dictate your actions. Or mine." After he left, Rachel returned to her workshop but found it difficult to concentrate. Zach's story echoed in her mind, along with the earnest look in his eyes as he told it. She recognized in him a kindred spirit, someone else who'd been judged unfairly, who carried a burden of others' misconceptions. But she also recognized the danger. The flutter in her chest when he looked at her, the warmth she felt in his presence, these were feelings she'd promised herself she would never indulge again. 2 loves had left her heart in tatters. A third might shatter it completely. And yet, as she worked late into the evening, her fingers crafting a pair of riding gloves that she told herself were not specifically for Zachariah Finch, Rachel couldn't help but wonder if some risks might be worth taking after all. The following week brought a steady stream of customers to Rachel's shop. Word had spread about a new pair of chaps she'd made for the Diamond T Ranch hand, adorned with intricate tooling of wild roses and sage, and several cowboys had come by to place orders of their own. It was the kind of business she needed, yet each time the bell jingled, she found herself hoping it might be Zach. It was Friday afternoon when Mabel Turner, the postmistress and one of the town's most notorious gossips, bustled into the shop clutching a newspaper. "Have you seen this, Rachel?" she asked without preamble, slapping the paper down on the counter. Just arrived on today's stage. Rachel wiped her hands on her apron and looked down at the Wyoming Territorial Tribune. There, on the third page, was a small article with the headline, "Wyoming Rancher's Son Confesses to False Accusation." Her heart racing, Rachel quickly scanned the article. According to the report, Bradley Wilson, son of prominent rancher Harlan Wilson, had confessed to fabricating evidence that had implicated a trail boss in the death of Emmett Hayes. The trail boss, unnamed in the article, had left the territory before his name could be cleared. "Isn't that the most interesting thing?" Mabel said, watching Rachel's face closely. "And here's the peculiar part. Sheriff Daniels received a letter just yesterday from the sheriff in Cheyenne, asking if a Zachariah Foster might be in our area. Seems they want to clear his name officially." Rachel carefully kept her expression neutral. "That is interesting, Miss Turner. Is there something specific you'd like me to make for you today?" Mabel looked disappointed at Rachel's lack of reaction. No. Just thought you'd want to know, seeing as you and that new foreman at Broken Spur seem friendly." She emphasized the last word meaningfully. "Mr. Finch has been a perfect gentleman," Rachel replied evenly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have orders to complete." After Mabel left, Rachel read the article again carefully. The details matched exactly what Zach had told her, confirmation that he'd been honest with her. She felt a surge of vindication on his behalf, followed by concern. If Zachariah Finch Foster's name was cleared, would he leave Steins Pass? Return to Wyoming, where he'd established a life before the incident? The thought troubled her more than it should have. That evening, as Rachel was closing up shop, she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Looking out the window, she saw Zach dismounting from a handsome bay gelding. Her heart skipped a beat as she quickly removed her work apron and smoothed her hair. The bell jangled as he entered, bringing with him the scent of leather, horses, and the open range. He removed his hat, revealing hair tousled by the wind and riding. "Miss Rachel," he greeted her, a smile warming his features. "I hope I'm not too late." "Not at all," she replied, aware of how breathless she sounded. "I was just closing up. I would have come sooner, but we've been moving cattle to the north pasture." He hesitated, then added, "I hear there's news from Wyoming." Rachel nodded. "Miss Turner brought the newspaper by earlier. Your name has been cleared." "Not officially," he said, "but the sheriff showed me the letter from Cheyenne. They want me to come back and give a statement so they can close the case properly." His eyes held hers. "I'll be leaving next week." "Oh." Rachel turned away, busying herself with arranging tools that were already perfectly aligned. That's good news, then. You'll be able to resume your life there." "That depends." She looked up. "On what?" "On whether there's a reason for me to come back here afterward." The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken words. Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she sat down and all. "Mr. Finch, Zach," he corrected gently. "After everything, I think we can dispense with formalities, don't you?" "Zach," she conceded, his name feeling intimate on her lips. "I don't know what you're asking me." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the small scar on his chin. "I think you do." "I can't," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "I've loved twice and lost twice. People here, they say I'm cursed, that any man who loves me is doomed." "And do you believe that?" Rachel closed her eyes briefly. "No, but it doesn't stop it from hurting when they say it. Rachel." His voice was gentle but firm. "Look at me." She did, finding his blue eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I've never put much stock in curses," he said. "I believe we make our own luck, good and bad. And I believe that a heart that's loved and lost is stronger than one that's never loved at all." "You don't know what you're saying," she protested. "The way people talk, let them talk," he interrupted. "Their words can only hurt us if we let them." He reached out, hesitating just shy of touching her. "I've watched you these past weeks. The way you hold your head high walking past those who whisper about you, the care you put into your work, the kindness you show to everyone, even those who have been cruel to you." His words touched something deep inside her, a place she'd thought permanently scarred over. The shop door flew open, the bell jangling violently. Sheriff Daniels stood there, his face grim. "Finch, we need to talk." Zach straightened, his hand dropping to his side. "What's this about, Sheriff?" "Got a telegram from Cheyenne." The sheriff's eyes flicked between them. "Bradley Wilson's been shot. He's claiming it was one of your friends seeking revenge." Rachel gasped. "That's ridiculous." "Zach's been here for months." "I know that," the sheriff said impatiently. "But Wilson's father is influential and he's demanding Finch's arrest." Zach's expression hardened. "On what grounds? I haven't set foot in Wyoming since I left 2 years ago." "Conspiracy, they're saying." "That you arranged it," the sheriff sighed. "Look, I don't believe it either, but I've got to follow procedure. I need you to come with me to answer some questions officially." Rachel stepped forward. "This is absurd. You can't possibly think it's all right," Zach said, touching her arm gently. "I have nothing to hide." He turned to the sheriff. "I'll come willingly, but I want it noted that I deny any involvement in whatever happened to Bradley Wilson." As the sheriff led Zach away, Rachel stood in the doorway of her shop, a cold fear gripping her heart. The familiar whispers had already started among the few people on the street, their eyes darting between her and Zach's retreating figure. "Another one," someone murmured. "Poor woman draws trouble like honey draws flies." Rachel squared her shoulders and went back inside, closing the door firmly against the gossip. But she couldn't shut out the worry that had taken root in her heart. Just when Zach's name had been cleared, just when something beautiful seemed possible between them, fate had intervened again. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps she was cursed after all. The news spread through Steins Pass like wildfire. By the following morning, everyone knew that Zachariah Finch was being held in the town jail while the sheriff exchanged telegrams with authorities in Cheyenne. The details grew more sensational with each retelling, until Rachel heard a customer in the general store claiming that Zach was wanted for multiple murders across 3 territories. Unable to concentrate on her work, Rachel closed her shop early and marched determinedly to the sheriff's office. The deputy on duty, young Billy Hancock, looked up in surprise when she entered. "Miss Rachel," he stammered, rising to his feet. "Sheriff's not here right now." "I'm not looking for the sheriff," she replied. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Finch, please." Billy fidgeted uncomfortably. "I don't know if that's allowed, madam." "Is he under arrest, Deputy Hancock?" "Well, no, not exactly. Sheriff's just holding him until we hear back from Wyoming." "Then he's entitled to visitors," Rachel stated firmly. "And I have business to discuss with him regarding an order for the Broken Spur Ranch." Billy hesitated, then shrugged. "I suppose it can't hurt. Just for a few minutes, mind." He led her to the cells at the back of the building. There were only two. Steins Pass didn't have much need for extensive jail facilities, and Zach occupied the one furthest from the door. He was sitting on the narrow cot, a book open in his hands, but looked up sharply when he heard their approach. "Rachel," he said, rising quickly. Surprise and something warmer flickered across his face. "5 minutes," Billy said, unlocking the cell door to let Rachel in. "I'll be at my desk." When they were alone, Rachel found herself suddenly unsure what to say. Zach looked tired, a shadow of stubble darkening his jaw, but his eyes were clear and steady as they met hers. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "It'll only give people more to talk about." "People will talk regardless," she replied, echoing his own words back to him. "How are you?" He smiled faintly. "I've been in worse places. Sheriff Daniels is a fair man. He's doing his job, but he's not convinced I'm involved in what happened to Wilson." "What exactly did happen?" "According to the telegrams, Bradley Wilson was shot while leaving a saloon in Cheyenne. He's alive, but claimed the shooter yelled something about this is for Foster before firing." Zach shook his head. "It's nonsense. I haven't had contact with anyone in Wyoming since I left." Rachel's hands twisted nervously in her skirt. "What will happen now?" "The sheriff is waiting to hear from the Cheyenne authorities. Once they confirm I've been here in Steins Pass for the past 2 months, they'll have to look elsewhere for their conspirator." He moved closer, his voice softening. "Rachel, about what I was saying before the sheriff interrupted." Her heart quickened. "Yes, I meant it, every word." He reached for her hand, his touch warm and sure. "I know you've been hurt. I know you're afraid to risk your heart again, but some things are worth the risk." Rachel looked down at their joined hands. "What if the rumors are true? What if I am cursed? I couldn't bear it if something happened to you too." "Look at me," he said gently. When she raised her eyes to his, he continued. "Do you believe in curses, Rachel? Truly believe?" She thought of Thomas, drunk and reckless in his grief. Of John, gone too soon in an accident that had claimed 2 other men as well. Neither death had truly been about her. "No," she admitted finally. "I don't. Neither do I. I believe in choices, in taking chances." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "And I choose to take a chance on you if you'll let me." The cell door opened and Billy cleared his throat awkwardly. "Time's up, Miss Rachel." Reluctantly, she withdrew her hand from Zach's. "I should go." "Will you come back tomorrow?" Zach asked, his eyes never leaving hers. "Yes," she promised. "I will." Rachel kept her word, returning to the jail the following day despite the disapproving looks she received from several townspeople as she walked down the main street. This time, Sheriff Daniels himself was on duty. "He's not here," the sheriff said before she could speak. Rachel's heart plummeted. "What do you mean? Has he been taken to Wyoming?" No, the sheriff hastened to add. "Got a telegram from Cheyenne this morning. The shooter confessed, turned himself in at the marshal's office. He was Bradley Wilson's gambling partner, had nothing to do with the old case. Wilson owed him money and made up the story about revenge to avoid paying his debts." Relief washed over Rachel. "So Zach is free." Released him an hour ago. He headed straight for the Broken Spur. Rachel thanked the sheriff and hurried back to her shop, her mind racing. Zach was cleared, truly cleared this time of any wrongdoing, yet he'd gone directly to the ranch without stopping to see her. What did that mean? She tried to focus on her work, but found herself constantly glancing at the door, hoping to hear the bell jingle and see Zach walk in. By closing time, he still hadn't appeared, and a heavy disappointment settled in her chest. Perhaps he'd reconsidered. Perhaps the intensity of their conversation in the jail cell had been born of the situation, rather than genuine feeling. The sun was setting as Rachel locked the shop door and headed toward her house. The evening was warm, the air heavy with the scent of sage and distant rain. As she approached her front porch, She noticed something hanging from the door handle, a pair of riding gloves. Not just any gloves. These were exquisitely crafted of the finest leather, with her initials RG tooled delicately into the cuffs. Work she recognized immediately as that of Frederickson's new leatherworker from Santa Fe. "Do they meet with your approval?" The voice came from the shadows of her porch. Zach stepped forward, his hat in his hands, a tentative smile on his face. "You had these made for me?" Rachel asked, taking the gloves down from the door handle. They were soft and supple, clearly expensive. "I thought it was time you had a new pair," he replied. "Your father's gloves have served you well, but perhaps it's time to create new memories." Rachel ran her fingers over the fine stitching. "They're beautiful, but why didn't you come to the shop? I was worried when the sheriff said you'd gone to the ranch." "I had arrangements to make," he explained. "I've resigned from Broken Spur." "Resigned? But why?" He stepped closer. "Because I'm leaving for Cheyenne tomorrow. I need to give my statement officially, clear my name once and for all." "Oh," Rachel tried to hide her disappointment. "Of course, you'll want a fresh start there." "No, Rachel, I want to close that chapter of my life completely, and then I want to come back here." Hope flared in her chest. "Here, to Steins Pass, to you," he said simply. "If you'll have me." The gloves slipped from Rachel's fingers as Zach closed the distance between them, his hands gently cupping her face. "I know it's fast. I know people will talk, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." "Zach," she whispered, her heart pounding. "I'm afraid." "So am I," he admitted. "But not of loving you, never of that." And then he was kissing her, his lips warm and gentle against hers, his hands sliding into her hair. Rachel found herself responding with a hunger that surprised her, her arms winding around his neck, drawing him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'll be gone 3 weeks at most. And then, if you'll still have me, I'd like to court you properly, Rachel Galloway." "And what if the town never accepts us?" she asked. "What if they never stop whispering about the widow who lost 2 husbands and dared to love a 3rd time?" Zach bent down and picked up the fallen gloves, pressing them into her hands. "Then we'll give them something new to whisper about. We'll show them that love isn't a curse, but the greatest blessing of all." As the stage pulled away from Steins Pass the next morning, Rachel stood in front of her shop, the new gloves on her hands as she waved goodbye. 3 weeks suddenly seemed like an eternity. But for the first time in years, she had something precious to hold on to: hope. The days crawled by with excruciating slowness. Rachel threw herself into her work, completing orders with a focused precision that even her most critical customers had to admire. In the evenings, she sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in golds and crimsons, wondering if Zach was seeing the same sky wherever he was on his journey to Wyoming. 1 week after his departure, a letter arrived. Rachel's hands trembled as she broke the seal, drinking in Zach's strong, slightly uneven handwriting. "My dearest Rachel, I write this from a way station in northern Arizona, where the stage has stopped for the night. The journey is long and the roads rough, but my thoughts of you make every discomfort bearable. I realized after leaving that I never told you properly what is in my heart. Perhaps it was cowardice, or perhaps I feared rushing you after all you've endured. But I cannot wait until my return to say it. I love you, Rachel Galloway. I think I began falling in love with you that first Sunday, watching you walk with your head held high past those who whispered behind your back. Your strength, your grace in the face of cruelty, these are rare qualities in this harsh world. By the time you read this, I will be nearing Cheyenne. I promise to conclude my business there as swiftly as possible and return to you. Until then, I remain eternally yours, Zachariah." Rachel pressed the letter to her heart, tears blurring her vision. She had not expected this, not just his declaration of love, but the overwhelming tide of emotion it unleashed within her. She had been so certain that her heart was permanently scarred, incapable of fully loving again. Yet here it was, beating strong and sure, filled with a love that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. That night, she sat at her small writing desk and penned her reply, pouring out the feelings she'd been trying so hard to deny. The letter would likely not reach him before he left Cheyenne, but it would be waiting when he returned to Steins Pass, proof that she had chosen to embrace the risk of loving again. 2 weeks after Zach's departure, Rachel was working in her shop when Sheriff Daniels appeared at her door, his expression grave. Her heart froze in her chest. "What is it?" she asked, already fearing the answer. "Is it Zach? Has something happened?" The sheriff removed his hat. There was an incident on the stage route near the Colorado border. Robbery attempt gone wrong. Rachel gripped the edge of her workbench, her knuckles turning white. "Tell me," she whispered. "Zach was shot defending the other passengers." The sheriff's voice was gentle. "He's alive, Rachel. But it's serious. They've taken him to a doctor in Durango." The world seemed to tilt around her. It was happening again, just as everyone had predicted. The curse was real after all. "I have to go to him," she said, already moving toward the door. "Rachel, it's nearly 4 days' journey. I don't care," she interrupted fiercely. "I'm going." Within an hour, Rachel had packed a small bag, closed her shop with a hastily written notice, and arranged passage on the southbound stage that would connect with the eastbound route to Durango. The journey was grueling, long hours in the swaying coach, brief stops at dusty way stations, nights spent in crude accommodations where she barely slept. All the while, her mind tormented her with images of Zach lying wounded, perhaps dying, in some frontier doctor's office. Had he called for her in his pain? Did he blame her for his misfortune? By the time the stage pulled into Durango, Rachel was exhausted, her nerves frayed to breaking point. The driver, who had heard her story, kindly directed her to Dr. Holloway's clinic on the edge of town. The doctor's assistant, a young woman with kind eyes, led Rachel to a small room at the back of the clinic. "He's been asking for you," she said softly. "The fever broke yesterday, which is a good sign." Rachel paused at the doorway, steeling herself for what she might find. Then, taking a deep breath, she stepped into the room. Zach lay on a narrow bed, his face pale against the white pillow. His chest was heavily bandaged, and an ugly bruise marked his left temple. But his eyes were open, clear and alert, and when he saw her, his face transformed with a smile that made her heart soar. "Rachel," he breathed, reaching out a hand to her. "You came." She rushed to his bedside, taking his hand in both of hers. "Of course I came. How could I not?" His fingers tightened around hers. "They told me it would be at least a week before word reached you. How did you get here so quickly?" "Sheriff Daniels told me what happened." Rachel's voice caught. "I left immediately. Oh, Zach, I was so afraid." "Hush," he said gently, tugging her closer. "I'm going to be fine. The bullet missed anything vital, just cost me some blood and a couple of ribs." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "This is my fault. Everyone said I was cursed, that any man who loved me was doomed. I should have believed them. Rachel, look at me." His voice was suddenly stern. "This was not your fault. The stage was attacked by bandits. It could have happened to anyone." "But it happened to you," she insisted. "Just like it happened to Thomas and to John." Zach struggled to sit up, wincing at the effort. "Listen to me. Thomas made his own choices after your child died. He turned to whiskey instead of turning to you. And John died in a mining accident that killed 2 other men as well. Neither of those tragedies was your doing. And now you," she whispered, "shot protecting strangers." "Yes," he agreed. Shot doing what any decent man would do when women and children were threatened. Shot making a choice that had nothing to do with you and everything to do with who I am. His eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. I refuse to let you take responsibility for my choices, Rachel. And I refuse to let you believe in this nonsense about a curse. A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Holloway, a white-haired man with spectacles perched on his nose, entered the room. "Mrs. Galloway, I presume?" he said, extending his hand. "Your husband has been most anxious for your arrival." Rachel started to correct him, but Zach squeezed her hand, a silent plea in his eyes. "Yes," she said instead. "How is he, doctor?" "On the mend," Dr. Holloway replied, checking Zach's bandages with practiced hands. "The wound is healing cleanly, and his fever has subsided. He's a strong man, should be well enough to travel in another week or so, provided he doesn't overexert himself." He gave Zach a meaningful look. "Which means staying in that bed, Mr. Finch." After the doctor left, Rachel raised an eyebrow at Zach. "Husband," a flush crept up his neck. It was simpler than explaining, and he hesitated, and perhaps it was wishful thinking on my part. The words hung between them, a question unasked but unmistakable. "Zach," Rachel began carefully, "we've known each other barely 2 months, and most of that time you've been either under suspicion or away." "I know," he acknowledged. "It's too soon. I understand that." "No, you don't," she said, surprising herself with her certainty. "What I was going to say is that I've spent years letting other people's judgments control my life. I've let fear keep me from reaching for happiness. I don't want to do that anymore." Hope dawned in his eyes. "What are you saying, Rachel?" She took a deep breath. "I'm saying that life is too short and too precious to waste. I'm saying that I love you, Zachariah Finch, and if you're still offering, I accept." Joy blazed across his face. "Are you sure? People will talk, let them," she interrupted, echoing his words from weeks before. "Their words can only hurt us if we let them." Zach pulled her down to him, his kiss fierce despite his weakened state. When they broke apart, he was grinning. "Well, Mrs. Finch, it seems we've scandalized Steins Pass without even being there." "I think," Rachel said, smiling through her tears, "that we're only just beginning to give them something to talk about." 2 weeks later, Rachel Galloway became Rachel Finch in a small ceremony performed by the local minister in Durango. The only witnesses were Dr. Holloway and his wife, who had taken a liking to the couple during Zach's recovery. It was improper, scandalous even, to marry so quickly, especially for a woman who had already buried 2 husbands. Rachel knew that tongues would wag furiously when they returned to Steins Pass. But as she spoke her vows, looking into Zach's steady blue eyes, she found she didn't care anymore. They took the stage back toward New Mexico territory, Zach still moving carefully to protect his healing wound, but growing stronger each day. The closer they got to Steins Pass, the more apprehensive Rachel became. "We could go elsewhere," Zach suggested as they neared the final leg of their journey. "Start fresh where no one knows our history." Rachel considered it briefly, then shook her head. "No, Steins Pass is my home. My father built that shop, taught me everything I know. I won't be driven away by gossip and superstition." Zach smiled, taking her hand. "That's my brave wife." The stage rolled into Steins Pass on a Sunday afternoon. As they stepped down onto the dusty Main Street, Rachel could already see the curious stares, the whispered conversations behind raised hands. Sheriff Daniels was the first to approach them, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. "Welcome back, both of you," he said, shaking Zach's hand and nodding to Rachel. "Word of your adventure reached us. Glad to see you on your feet, Finch." "Thank you, Sheriff," Zach replied. "It's good to be back." As they walked toward Rachel's house, their house now Mrs. Henderson and her daughter crossed the street to intercept them. Rachel tensed, prepared for the woman's judgment, but was surprised when Mrs. Henderson extended a hesitant hand. "Mrs. Finch," she said, the new name awkward on her lips. "We heard about the stage robbery and about your marriage." She glanced at Zach, then back to Rachel. "I wanted to say, that is, I hope you'll be very happy." Taken aback, Rachel accepted the offered hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson." And the older woman continued, her voice lowering, "I wanted to apologize for the things I said before, about being cursed. It was unkind and unchristian of me." Rachel swallowed past the lump in her throat. "Thank you," she said again, meaning it deeply. As they continued toward home, more townspeople greeted them, some genuinely warm, others merely curious, a few still openly disapproving. But it was a start. "See," Zach murmured, his arm supportive around her waist. "Not everyone believes in curses." When they reached the house, Zach insisted on carrying her over the threshold despite his still healing wound. Inside, Rachel was surprised to find fresh flowers on the table and a fire laid in the grate. "Mary," she guessed, thinking of her sister in Santa Fe. "She must have arranged this when she got my letter." Zach set her down gently, his hands lingering at her waist. "Home," he said simply. Rachel looked around at the modest house that had seen so much of her life, her childhood, her grief, her solitary struggle to maintain her dignity and independence. Now it would witness a new chapter. "There's something I want to show you," she said, leading him to the bedroom. From the bottom drawer of her bureau she withdrew a pair of worn leather gloves, her father's gloves that she had mended so many times. "I want you to have these." Zach took them carefully. "Rachel, these are precious to you." "Yes," she agreed, "and so are you. My father would have liked you, I think. He valued honesty and hard work above all else." Zach turned the gloves over in his hands, his expression thoughtful. "I'm honored," he said finally. "But are you sure? These are your connection to him." "I don't need gloves to remember my father," Rachel replied. "And besides, I have these now." She held up her hands, showing the fine riding gloves he had given her. "It's time for new memories, remember?" He pulled her close, his kiss tender and full of promise. "New memories," he agreed. "A lifetime of them." The following morning, Rachel reopened her shop with Zach by her side. They had discussed their future late into the night, how he would help expand the business, perhaps adding saddle making to her current offerings, using the skills he had learned in his travels. Their first customer was Elijah Peterson, who needed a new bridle for his wagon team. As Rachel showed him the options, Zach worked quietly in the background, organizing the tools and materials that had been neglected during their absence. "Heard you two got hitched in Colorado," Elijah said, his weathered face impassive. "We did," Rachel confirmed, bracing herself for judgment. Instead, the old rancher nodded thoughtfully. "Good. 'Bout time this town remembered what matters. Two people finding happiness ain't nobody's business but their own." After Elijah left, more customers trickled in throughout the day. Some came with legitimate business, others merely to satisfy their curiosity about Steins Pass's most talked about couple. By closing time, Rachel was exhausted but strangely content. "Not so bad, was it?" Zach asked as they walked home together, the setting sun casting long shadows across the street. "Better than I expected," Rachel admitted. "Though I imagine not everyone will come around so quickly." "They will," he said confidently. "In time." That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Rachel finally allowed herself to believe that happiness was possible, that love could be stronger than fear or superstition or the judgment of others. "Zach," she whispered, her head resting on his chest, careful of his healing wound. "Do you ever wonder why we found each other? After everything we've both been through?" His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I don't believe in coincidence, if that's what you're asking. I think perhaps we both needed to walk difficult paths to recognize what truly matters when we found it." Rachel thought of Thomas, of John, of the grief that had nearly broken her. She thought of Zach's ordeal in Wyoming, the false accusations, his flight from a life he had built. All of it had led them here, to this moment, to each other. "I used to think my heart was too damaged to love again," she confessed, "that I had used up all my chances." "The heart doesn't work that way," Zach replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "It's not like a candle that burns down to nothing. It's more like—" He paused, searching for the right words. "More like leather, I suppose. It can be cut and pierced, but with proper care it becomes stronger at the mended places. More resilient." Rachel smiled in the darkness. "A leatherworker's metaphor. Appropriate, don't you think?" His arms tightened around her. "You and I were both scarred by life, but those scars don't define us. They're just part of our story." In the months that followed, Zach and Rachel's business flourished. His reputation as a saddle maker grew alongside her established name for fine leatherwork. They expanded the workshop, hiring young Billy Hancock's younger brother as an apprentice when the boy showed an aptitude for the craft. The whispers about Rachel's curse gradually faded, replaced by admiration for the thriving business and the obvious devotion between the Finches. Even Mrs. Henderson became something of a friend, often stopping by the shop to chat or bringing baked goods when she knew Rachel was busy with large orders. 1 year after their return to Steins Pass, Rachel made a discovery that both thrilled and terrified her. She kept it to herself for nearly 2 weeks, watching Zach carefully each evening as they ate dinner, wondering how he would receive the news. Finally, on a quiet Sunday afternoon as they sat on their porch watching a summer thunderstorm roll across the distant mountains, she found the courage to tell him. "Zach," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I need to tell you something." He turned to her, his expression immediately concerned. "What is it? Are you unwell?" Rachel took a deep breath. "I'm with child." For a moment, Zach simply stared at her as if processing her words. Then his face transformed with such joy that it brought tears to her eyes. "A baby," he whispered, reaching for her hands. "Our baby." "You're happy?" she asked, relief flooding through her. "Happy," he laughed, pulling her into his arms. "Rachel, I'm overjoyed, ecstatic. There aren't enough words." He drew back to look at her face. "But you? You're frightened, aren't you?" "Because of before," she nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Her first pregnancy had ended in such devastation, the loss of their child destroying her marriage to Thomas as surely as it had broken her heart. "Listen to me," Zach said, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "What happened before was a tragedy, but it doesn't dictate what will happen now. We'll take every precaution. I'll bring in the best doctor from Silver City if I have to." "I know," Rachel said. "I know all of that in my head. But my heart—" "Your heart remembers the pain," he finished for her. "Of course it does, and it's right to be cautious." He placed a hand over her still flat stomach. "But this child is a blessing, Rachel, a new beginning, and whatever happens, we will face it together." As her pregnancy progressed, Rachel was surprised by the support that emerged from the community. Women who had once gossiped about her now brought remedies for morning sickness and offered advice about baby care. The local dressmaker, Mrs. Abernathy, created specially adapted work aprons that allowed Rachel to continue in the shop well into her 7th month. Even the most stubborn holdouts, those who had been certain that Rachel's curse would bring disaster to Zach, found it difficult to maintain their suspicions in the face of the couple's evident happiness and prosperity. In early spring, after a relatively easy labor, Rachel gave birth to a healthy son they named William Thomas Finch, William for Zach's father, Thomas in memory of Rachel's first husband and the child they had lost. As Rachel held her son for the first time, Zach sitting beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, she felt a sense of completion she had never thought possible again. "He's perfect," Zach whispered, gently touching the baby's downy head. "Yes," Rachel agreed, tears of joy sliding down her cheeks. "Perfect." Later, when the midwife had gone and the baby slept peacefully in the cradle Zach had crafted, Rachel found herself thinking of that day nearly 2 years ago when Zachariah Finch had first walked her home from church. "What are you smiling about?" Zach asked, coming to sit beside her. "I was thinking about the day we met, about how afraid I was to let anyone close to me again." He took her hand, his thumb caressing her wedding ring. "And now I understand what my father always told me, that the opinions of others matter less than the truth in your own heart." She looked at their sleeping son, then back to her husband. "My heart knows the truth of you, Zachariah Finch, and I'm so grateful I found the courage to trust it." Zach leaned in to kiss her, his touch as gentle as it had been that first time outside her shop. "As am I, my love, as am I." 5 years passed, bringing prosperity to the Finch family and to Steins Pass itself. The railroad had finally extended a spur line to the town, bringing new businesses and opportunities. Zach and Rachel's leatherworking shop had expanded to include a small factory where they employed 6 workers, producing saddles and tack that were shipped as far as Kansas City and Denver. William, now a sturdy 5-year-old with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair, had been joined by a 3-year-old sister, Emma Grace. Rachel, once whispered about as cursed, was now respected as one of the town's most successful business owners and a devoted mother. On a warm autumn afternoon, as Rachel worked on a special order in the quiet of their home workshop while the children napped, she heard the front door open and close. "Rachel," Zach's voice called. "In here," she replied, setting aside the intricately tooled leather piece she was working on. Zach appeared in the doorway, his hat in his hands, an odd expression on his face. At 39, he was still as handsome as the day they'd met, though silver now threaded through his hair at the temples. "What is it?" Rachel asked, immediately concerned. "Has something happened?" He came into the room, pulling a letter from his pocket. "This arrived on today's mail stage. It's from Cheyenne." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. Though Wyoming was far in their past, the mention of Cheyenne still brought back memories of their difficult beginning. "What does it say?" she asked. Zach handed her the letter. "It's from the county clerk. Harlan Wilson Bradley's father died last month. Apparently he had no other heirs and his will specified that his property should go to." He hesitated. "To me." Rachel stared at him in shock, then quickly scanned the letter. "The Rocking W Ranch, 5,000 acres, 200 head of cattle, main house and outbuildings." She looked up. "But why?" "The man blamed you for his son's disgrace. Bradley himself tried to have you arrested. According to the letter, Bradley died 2 years ago, consumption. Before he died, he wrote a full confession exonerating me and apparently convinced his father of the truth." Zach sat down heavily in the chair opposite her. "The solicitor writes that Harlan considered this bequest a form of restitution. What will you do?" Zach ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Rachel recognized as a sign of his agitation. "I don't know. It's valuable land, more valuable now with the railroad expanding northward. We could sell it, invest the money in the business here." Rachel studied her husband's face, reading the conflict there. Or we could go see it," he said cautiously. "Consider if it might be an opportunity." "You want to move to Wyoming?" Rachel asked, surprised. "Leave Steins Pass?" "Not necessarily," Zach said quickly. "But I can't help thinking. William will be school-age soon. Emma too, before long. Steins Pass has grown, but it's still a small town with limited opportunities for education. Rachel considered his words. It was true that she had worried about the children's schooling. The town had only one teacher, elderly Miss Perkins, who taught all 8 grades in the one-room schoolhouse. "We've built a good life here," she said slowly. "The business, our home, our friends." "We have," Zach agreed. "And if you want to stay, we'll stay. This is your home, Rachel. I would never ask you to leave it if that's not what you want." Rachel rose from her chair and moved to the window, looking out at the town that had seen so much of her life, her joys and sorrows, her struggles and triumphs. 5 years ago, she had insisted on returning here, on facing down the gossip and judgment rather than running away. But now, looking at Zach's letter, she realized something important. Steins Pass no longer held the power over her that it once had. She had conquered its judgment, proved herself stronger than the whispers. Perhaps it was time for a new adventure. "Let's go see it," she said finally, turning back to Zach. Not to decide immediately, but to consider the possibility. His face lit up with the smile that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. "You're sure?" "I'm sure that I want to see this place that could be our future." She crossed to him, placing her hands on his shoulders. "And I'm sure that home isn't a place, Zach. It's where we are together, you and me and our children." He pulled her onto his lap, his arms encircling her waist. "Have I told you lately how much I love you, Rachel Finch?" "Every day," she replied, leaning down to kiss him. "But I never tire of hearing it." 6 months later, the Finch family boarded the train that would take them to their new home in Wyoming. The entire town of Steins Pass had turned out to see them off, a far cry from the cold shoulders and whispers that had greeted Rachel upon her return 7 years earlier. As the train pulled away from the station, Rachel looked out the window at the familiar landscape slowly receding. William and Emma were pressed against the glass of the opposite window, excitedly pointing out cows and horses to each other. Zach took her hand, his thumb brushing over the fine leather of her gloves, newer versions of the ones he had given her when they first met. "Having second thoughts?" he asked gently. Rachel shook her head. "No, just remembering the bad times, some," she admitted, "but mostly the good. How we found each other, how we built something beautiful together despite everything." Zach squeezed her hand. "And now we'll build something new." "Yes," Rachel agreed, turning from the window to smile at her husband. "Something new." As the train carried them north toward Wyoming and the rocking W Ranch, Rachel thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a shamed widow to a respected businesswoman and beloved wife and mother. From a falsely accused cowboy to a successful craftsman and now a rancher. Their story had not been an easy one. There had been pain and obstacles, judgment and fear. But through it all, they had chosen to trust in themselves, in each other, and in the resilience of a heart strong enough to love again. "What are you thinking?" Zach asked, breaking into her reverie. Rachel looked at their children, then back to the man who had changed her life by having the courage to take her worn glove and say, "I trust your heart." "I was thinking," she said with a smile that held all the love in her heart, "that sometimes the most beautiful journeys begin when we're brave enough to take a chance on love." Zach leaned in to kiss her, his eyes reflecting the same certainty she felt in her soul. "And that," he whispered against her lips, "is a journey that never truly ends." Outside the train window, the landscape of New Mexico gave way to the plains of Colorado, the first step in their new adventure together. But Rachel knew, as she had known since that day Zach walked her home from church, that the greatest adventure of all was the one they shared in their hearts, a love strong enough to withstand judgment, to overcome fear and to believe in second chances. or, in her case, a third.